to have a happy family, to have a happy, meaningful life, and things you're willing to share with us. You know, on those sheets I gave my advice, last one give your advice as well. There are two homeworks, homework 17 and 18. Those will be the last two homeworks of the class. Friday is going to, today, I think today will be a pretty, I know their content is generally easy. Friday, we're going to be having some curves and doing some things called tangent lines. I think they're easy. Most people find them pretty easy. Most people have had a lot of it in high school. But just in case I did a little warning about that, you don't even know what a tangent line is, you might want to look at it before you come. All right, two things that are just interesting that you will not be responsible for. Two things recently in the news. Raise your hand if you've heard of a thing called Bitcoin. Okay, a few. Remember when we discussed money, we learned that anything could be money. Roman soldiers were paid in salt. That's where their salary came from. Remember the big wheel that went to the bottom of the ocean, and they still said, okay, it's money. Well, some unknown person who still don't know exactly who it is said, I'm going to start my own currency about a few years ago, I think around 2009. And what they wanted to do is create a currency that could not be manipulated by anyone. It's like they wanted to make money gold, and they wanted to make sure there could only be a fixed amount of gold. But what they did is something kind of like Napster, a peer-to-peer computer program. And there's this currency. And it was to be used as money. God said, I'm going to create money right here. And of course, as long as people come to accept it as money, it could be real money. And what you would do is you'd get on your computers, and to get this money, just like you would have to dig for gold, your computer had to solve problems to get Bitcoin. So the first people in were able to get a lot of Bitcoin. But just like the more gold you find, the harder it is to get the rest of the gold, because it's deeper and harder spaces. It's got to the point where now to dig up Bitcoins, it's really, really hard, and our computers stand no chance of even getting one. So the idea there was there's a certain amount of Bitcoin out there, you have to work to get it, but after there's a certain amount out there, it's not going to increase. It's not going to be any more. And at first this was just kind of a news, and it still probably is, just kind of an interesting little story. And the way it works is that if I pay you money, we both install this software on our computers, and everybody who uses Bitcoins has this software. This is my understanding of it. And it's kind of this open source. And we know people aren't just creating more Bitcoins, because if you understand the program, you can go in and see the program and see it's impossible. Now, I don't understand exactly how that kind of software works, but it's the kind of thing like just because you can't go into, just like you can't go into PayPal and make up money, you can't go into Bitcoin and just make up new Bitcoins. Now, the reason I'm talking about this now is that it's getting a lot of attention because of this graph. We don't know exactly why. Maybe it had something to do in Cyprus. Maybe it's just a speculative bubble that has no more basis in reality than the high house prices in 2007. But this is the number of dollars it takes to buy a Bitcoin. In January of 2013, it was just, what, 30, 15, something like that. Recently, it went above 200 and gone down a little since then. So this has got a lot of people's attention. A lot of people started wanting to buy Bitcoin. They seen the price going up. They say, I'm going to buy some because it's going up. So what's going to happen here, nobody has any idea. Are people really interested in this Bitcoin now? We don't know. Is it a bubble that people are just playing and speculating? We don't know. But one thing this does tell us is that just because you go away from a fiat money and you go to a source of money that is fixed, it doesn't mean you can't have inflation. The value of that money, even if it's fixed, can have wild swings just like this. And there are many economists who think if we went to a gold standard, prices would be more volatile than they are today when we're printing a bunch of money. Another thing in the news, well, not really recent. I just learned about it. You know, when you look at your money, I think it says, "In God we trust" on it. Well, most of us know that was kind of a recent thing. 1950s, we added that. But before that, one of the first currencies to be printed didn't say, "In God we trust." It said, "Mind your business." I don't know the story. I've read that it was Benjamin Franklin's idea. I don't know exactly what they meant by it, but it said, "Mind your business." I don't know what it means. I just think that's interesting. What we're going to do today is this one worksheet and then some quicker questions. Go ahead and get your calculators out. There's a whole area of production economics. I don't think very highly of it because it tends to be just math for math's sake. But there is two things that everybody in Intro to Econ or Intro to Econ class should know regarding production econ. And it's something you already know if we just ask the right question. If I ask the question the way you understand it, you already know. I think this is going to be a pretty easy little lesson.
Show me where you like what he's talking about.
Look at me first. What you see here is you've got a worksheet. And it's a table. In the first column it says the pounds of nitrogen per acre. We're thinking about wheat. This is a very, very, very simplified model of how wheat production takes place. Any farming enterprise is incredibly complex. There's lots of inputs. You never really know the effect of one input of another. What you do on a piece of land today affects what that land can do for years and years afterwards. But if you don't understand the very simple models, it's harder to really understand the real complex model. So let's start with something really simple, where we're saying, okay, there are 5 different levels of nitrogen that we could apply to wheat. Remember, most fertilizer consists of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen usually being the most important. We could put 0 pounds per acre, 20, 40, 60, or 80. And in the second column, I have the wheat yield you would expect from those nitrogen applications. I took those numbers from some sources. They are relevant to some areas. If you're a wheat farmer, it may not represent yields on your farm. And then in the third column, I said cost of nitrogen application was the total cost, revenues, and profits per acre. And we're going to fill out the table. In the first column, we have N, and we have 0, 20, 40, 60, and 80. What this exercise is intended to do is to help us think about, given the relationship between nitrogen use and yield, how much nitrogen do we want to apply to the land? And so obviously we want to look at the cost of applying nitrogen and the benefits we get out of nitrogen in terms of the extra wheat we get and how much that wheat can be sold for. First thing it wants us to do is calculate the cost of the total nitrogen application. For instance, when 40 pounds is applied, what's the cost of all that 40 pounds? And I'll tell you then that the nitrogen price is 30 cents per pound of them. So all it's asking you to do is take the nitrogen application here, 0 pounds times 0.3. That gives you the cost of N. In the second one, we have 20 pounds times 0.36. those, and then you get 12, then you get 18, then you get 24. Remember, this is a very simple model. I'm only concentrating on N. And so everything else, every other input, we're just kind of holding constant for right now. And this fourth column says total cost, and then it tells you the cost of other inputs equals 170 per acre. And there we'll do total cost. We assume, it's not a good assumption, but for now it's going to help us, that regardless of how much N nitrogen you use, you're going to use the same amount of other inputs. And all those other inputs total to 170 per acre. So total cost, you just take the 170 plus the cost of nitrogen to get your total cost of production. This is really easy, so if I give you a table as on the final, you should be able to fill out these numbers. We're not applying nitrogen just for shits and giggles. We're doing it to get some wheat that we're going to sell, take that money, and use that money for things that are just shits and giggles. So now we want to look at the revenues. And revenues are how much wheat you harvest times the price of wheat that you get in the market. I'm telling you there that the wheat price is $6.50 per bushel. And so for the revenue, we take the yield, 23 bushels per acre, times 6.5 per bushel. Rest of them. And then finally, we have profits. You know what profits are. Take all the money that comes in from the wheat you sell, minus all the money you spend to grow the wheat. So here, like revenues of 149.5 minus total cost of 170 gives you losses of when I'm putting a number in parentheses, that means a negative number. That's usually how you do it in accounting. If you don't like that, if you think you'll confuse you, just take away the parentheses and make it a negative. Now I want you to do the rest, not because it's hard or anything. I want you to do the next 4 rows. And as you calculate those profits, think about what is happening to those profits. Go ahead and calculate the last 4 rows of profits. And then we're going to ask how much nitrogen we should apply. sorry. I didn't even hand out these sheets, did I? I'm so sorry. I've got the worksheets for you.
It was the DA's fault, right?
Yeah, you saw I fired them. They're gone. What's the man? Can you help me hand out? I think
Read his shirt. Yeah, really. Buddy.
I guess I'll, let me get a blank one. Yeah, let me get one more from
Here, can you get another one, please?
Y'all threw it off, coming so prepared. That's what I got to do to him.
I see.
How dare you come prepared for class?
Oh, wow. Do I get points for that?
100.
No, I like to refer to my quote for life on this one. When in doubt, it's my fault.
I prefer the one that you gave.
I prefer mine. Something's easier when you just stop caring. So true.
Way out off the top of like our farmers aren't going to make very much money. You better have some good subsidies.
It's not a trick question, it is a detailed thing. Number 2 says, to maximize profits, one should apply how many pounds of nitrogen?
60.
60. And harvest how many bushels?
37.
37. And making how many profits? 52.50. So number 2 is 60 pounds of nitrogen, 37 bushels of wheat per acre, and 52.50 per acre of profits, because this number is bigger than the other numbers. To maximize yield, one should apply how many pounds of nitrogen? 80. And this is what I don't think is very important, but a lot of other people do. If I came up and I said, to make the most money, should you maximize your yields? You would probably say yes, because the question seems like I'm trying to give you an easy question to prepare you for something else. And so often when I come to students and ask that question, do you maximize profit by maximizing yield, you tend to hear the yes. And that makes some people think that you don't understand something very important, but I don't think that's true. Because if I phrase the question in a way that you really understand what I'm doing, you would get the right answer. Suppose I ask the question this way. To make the most money, should you maximize yields in every single way, regardless of the cost? You would probably say no. Because you know that going out, you could spend many more hours with a pitcher of water above a wheat plant, doing absurd things that increase yield for just a little bit of really, really expensive. You know that's not the case. And so I want to make sure I say that to maximize profits, you don't always want to maximize yield, whether it be wheat or cattle, but it's something that you really already know. Now, number 4 says, why doesn't the maximum yield result in a maximum profit? You know, but I want you to write down the answer that I'm going to write down. Because it's a verbiage that you might see in other classes. What I wrote was, the additional revenue generated by increasing nitrogen from 60 to 80 pounds are only 5.2 per acre. So going from 60 to 80 pounds of nitrogen only brings in $5.2 more revenue, whereas the cost of that extra 20 pounds was $6. So it doesn't make sense to spend $6 in extra nitrogen when it only gives you 5.2 in return. That's something you recognize immediately. Now I got one more sentence I want you to write down. something you know. Input should only be used when the additional revenue they provide exceed the cost. This isn't really expert, it's really a tautology. It says input should only be used when they make you money. It doesn't say that much more than that. A lot of times, if you take another instructor in this class, you might spend kind of weeks on this and use a lot of terms like marginal revenue, marginal cost, that kind of thing. And there is something to be gained out of that. I don't want to do that because you're probably going to forget those terms anyway. And I want to just take us to the thing you really need to understand right now. That when economists think about how much of an input should be used, we tend to do this thing called marginal analysis, where we kind of go one step at a time. We start with 0 nitrogen. Should we apply 1 pound? If this is true, yes. Should we apply 2 pounds? If this is true, yes. And on and on and on. And we keep increasing nitrogen until we hit the point when it no longer takes. And the additional revenue you get is less than the additional cost of the nitrogen. And that's one reason why economics turns into calculus at later stages, because it's talking about changing small units at a time. But at its core, something you know anyway. So the important thing is you recognize that maximizing profits isn't the same. You don't do that by maximizing yields. And this sentence should be familiar to you. You should understand what I'm trying to say there. That's all. Really easy stuff. Now go to the next sheet. Turn the page. Exact same table. Everything is the same except the wheat price. So the cost of nitrogen is the same. Total costs are going to be the same. But the revenues are going to be different because the wheat price falls from $6.50 to $4.50. Meaning for columns 3 and 4, you can just copy what you had on the other page. The numbers are going to be exactly the same. And then after copying those, go ahead and calculate the revenues and profits per acre on the new sheet. Remember, the only thing that changes is the price of wheat.
Our wheat farmers are going to be a wheat farmer for very long.
Oh, you're just going to wait till it out here somewhere else. What's that?
What goes up must come down, what goes up down must come up.
You can always have the government help too. They really like farmers. Well, they like rich farmers who donate lots of money to them. Just probably not using all your money buried in the ground, right? I'm sure senators would take that. One thing that's implied in this table is that we have a decision of how much nitrogen to use, but the decision of whether we're going to grow wheat has already been made. So you can think of it like this. You entered in a contract to provide wheat to someone, and you deliver as much wheat as you could at whatever price the market price was. So you've got to produce some wheat. Question is how much dependent on your nitrogen application rate, which means that fixed cost of 170, or that cost of other inputs 170 per acre, you've got to pay that no matter what. You've got to harvest some wheat no matter what. The question is how much do we apply? When you do the profits, I was getting, so we're losing money to begin with. Losing a little less. So muscle man, if this was you, how much nitrogen would you apply?
60 pounds.
60 pounds. You got it. Now, if that's obvious to you, here's what happens again. A lot of times economists will come in front of freshman students and say, is there ever a case you should harvest wheat even when you're losing money? Is there ever a case you should operate a factory when you're losing money? Is there ever a case where you should raise cattle when you're losing money? And the question begs to be saying, no, you feel like they're just throwing you some softballs to get you to a harder question. But then they'll say, no, that's not right, because sometimes you still want to apply inputs even if you're going to lose money. But that question they ask is just, it doesn't give you enough information to answer on. So here's the deal. You've got to harvest wheat. You've got to pay that $170 per acre no matter what. And you've got to harvest some wheat. So even if you decide not to apply any nitrogen, you're going to lose $66.50. And then you ask, well, should I apply more nitrogen? I'm still losing money, but I'm losing less. Of course, you should apply. So there are some times you would apply nitrogen to raise wheat, even though you know you're going to lose money, it's because you're losing less wheat. So in our answers for number 6, even though you always lose money no matter how much nitrogen you apply, would you still want to raise wheat, raise and harvest wheat? Do this. The sentence that says, would you still want to raise and harvest wheat, scratch that out. That suggests that you have the option of raising wheat. You only have the option of how much nitrogen to apply. And we can make a question that says, even though you always lose money no matter how much nitrogen applied, should you apply some nitrogen? So add that to it. Instead of the part you scratched out, replace it with, should you apply nitrogen? And the answer is yes, because you lose less money by doing so. So answer number 6, yes, you would multiply nitrogen because you lose less money by doing it. Number 7 says, how much nitrogen should you apply? Muscle man was right, 60 pounds, because you lose the least money, which is the same thing as maximizing profits. It's just that profits are negative. The question really hasn't changed, it's just that profits become a negative number. Okay. And this is the last thing. Here I am introducing 2 definitions that are intuitive. I want you to know, and they're pretty easy. It says, why is it sometimes in your interest to operate a business even if it loses money? Use the concept of variable cost, cost that changes, you change your production output, and fixed cost, cost that stay the same as you change your production output. So I've given you the definitions of variable and fixed costs. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, then I'm going to write a couple sentences on the board that I want you to talk about. Nitrogen here is a variable cost because if we want to increase our output, increase the number of bushels we harvest, we've got to apply more nitrogen. So yield goes up, nitrogen goes up. Yield goes down, nitrogen goes down. So it's a variable cost. The more wheat we produce, the more nitrogen we need. For a car factory, you gotta make more cars, you need more windshields for the windows, you need more steel for the car. Any of these inputs that you need more of as you produce more stuff or variable. A lot of times you have these things called fixed costs that are exactly the same no matter how much you produce. Imagine a farmer who borrowed money to buy land, and so he still has to make the same mortgage payment to the bank for the land no matter what he does with the land. Even if prices are so low, she doesn't want to raise anything on the land, she still has to make that payment for the land. And that's a fixed cost. It stays the same no matter how much you apply. And that $170 per acre, that cost of other inputs, that's a fixed cost. Because in our very simple analysis, it's the same no matter how much we produce. And this answer I'm going to write, it's if you were used to this terminology, it would make perfect sense to you. It's not going to teach you anything new, but it's going to show you how to take what you already know and use it with some different words. These terms, fixed cost and variable cost, once you start taking more business courses, any business course, and get into accounting, you're going to be using fixed and variable costs all the time. Any business, they usually throw around those terms a lot. Pretty easy, so we'll get to that. Generic terms, so long as you operate at a level, in the context of this problem, will be a level N, level of nitrogen you apply. So long as you operate at a level where revenues exceed variable costs, you have earned some money to offset the fixed costs you must pay. There's only one more thing to say. These things that are fixed costs, you might as well ignore them in a short run, because they're not in your control. If they're fixed, you got to pay them no matter what. No matter what you do, you got to pay it. So you don't have any control of it, so you might as well ignore it. But if you're going to produce more stuff, you need more of these variable inputs. And so long as the money that comes in from what you produce exceeds the money that goes out for those variable costs, you should be producing. Meaning, so long as the money that comes in from higher yields from applying nitrogen are greater than the money you spent on the nitrogen, the variable cost, you should use more nitrogen. So your decision of how much nitrogen to apply should have nothing to do with other fixed costs. Because so long as those revenues exceed those variable costs, you have some money, and you apply it to those fixed costs. And if that revenue is minus variable costs, and this is what I'm going to write on that. If that money you make there, just over your variable costs, doesn't exceed fixed costs, then at least you lose less money, like in our example here. But if this does exceed fixed costs, then you make money. Right. This is the last sentence. If this money, and I hope it's obvious the money I'm talking about when revenues minus variable costs, not revenues minus total costs. So if revenues exceed your variable costs, the revenues minus variable costs is greater than your fixed costs, you made money, like in the first table. Good. If it does not, at least you lose less money. Clicker snake.
You were filling that out for me. I was just gonna say, fill it out for yourself. Looks like you did both, didn't you? Nice. Thank you.
I was riding so hard here. I was like, oh my god, I gotta get it.
I'll read the question, then there'll be 20 seconds to answer. Make sure, even if right before it runs out, you get your click in. For any factory, the profit maximizing level of labor usage, labor being an input like nitrogen is an input to wheat production, is whatever usage of labor maximizes the factory's output. Remember, we didn't want to keep applying N to maximize yield. We want to maximize profit. Same deal here. A factory should not try to maximize production. Instead, it should keep using more labor, assuming labor is the only input, so long as the additional revenues from more labor exceed the additional cost of more labor. Are you allergic to mussels? Yeah. All that protein, living protein are in there.
I'm not linked up to your channel for some reason. Something keeps telling me. Worry about it later.
Okay, come to Good, good, good. Y'all are getting it now. Even if a factory operates at a loss, it may still wish to continue production. May being the operative word.
Trying to find it now, but I don't know if it's.
Yes, good. Good. The only time a factory should operate at a loss is when its revenues exceed variable costs. It's not that you don't know the answer, you're just not used to the word. You just got to get used to how these questions are asked. For a feedlot where they take teenage cattle and fatten them on corn for slaughter, the corn fed to the cattle is a fixed cost because you must always feed cattle every day. That's a little tricky. It's a little tricky. What necessarily prepared. The idea is if you want to produce more beef, more live cattle, you need more cows, which means you'll need more feed. I recognize that's a bit tricky. I didn't know. Thank you. See you today tomorrow.